The stallion hadn't touched food in 5 days. Not a single bite. The ranch hands tried everything. Sweet grain, fresh water, even force-feeding him. Nothing worked. But that wasn't the strangest part. Every night, the horse would drag himself to the broken fence at the edge of the property, and just stand there, staring into the darkness like he was waiting for someone who would never come back. People in town started whispering that the animal was dying from heartbreak after his owner's mysterious death. Some even said the stallion knew a secret no human dared to speak aloud. Then one cold evening, a poor widow nobody respected walked onto the ranch. No money. No family. Just trembling hands and tears in her eyes. The workers tried to stop her, until the dying stallion suddenly lifted his head for the first time in days. And the moment she placed her hand on his neck, the horse began to cry. The ranch had never been this quiet before. No laughter from the workers. No music drifting from the barn. Even the wind felt heavy, like the land itself was mourning. 3 days earlier, the owner of the ranch had been found dead near the North Trail under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered darker things after sunset. But nobody truly knew what had happened that night. Since the funeral, a strange sadness had settled over the property. The animals were restless, the workers barely spoke, and the largest stallion on the ranch had stopped eating completely. The black horse, once powerful and fearless, now stood motionless inside his stable with hollow eyes fixed on the distance. Buckets of fresh water remained untouched. Expensive grain spoiled in front of him. Apples, carrots, sugar cubes, nothing mattered anymore. "He's giving up," one ranch hand whispered. The workers tried everything they could think of. One man stayed awake all night beside the horse, hoping comfort would help. Another rode 2 hours into town to bring medicine from a veterinarian. They mixed special feed, cleaned the stable, even played the soft harmonica tunes the old owner used to play every evening. Nothing worked. The stallion would only breathe slowly and stare beyond the ranch as if searching for someone who was no longer there. Day after day, his ribs became more visible. His strength faded so quickly that even standing seemed painful. Soon, rumors spread through the small town nearby. At the barber shop, in grocery stores, and outside the church, people spoke about the dying horse in hushed voices. Some believed the stallion was grieving the death of his owner. Others claimed animals could sense truths humans could not. A few older villagers even whispered that the horse had witnessed something terrible the night the ranch owner died. Every rumor made the story darker. But the strangest thing happened every single night. Long after the workers went inside, the stallion would slowly leave the stable and walk toward the same broken fence near the edge of the ranch. Nobody understood how he still had the strength. He would stand there silently beneath the moonlight, staring into the empty road beyond the fields. Waiting. Always waiting. One ranch hand finally muttered the thought everyone feared. "He thinks someone is coming back." The others laughed nervously, but none of them could explain the horse's behavior. Every night, the stallion returned to that fence as though he expected to see a familiar face appear from the darkness. Sometimes he stood there for hours without moving at all. And then, on the 5th night after the owner's death, something changed. A young stable boy noticed movement far beyond the road while carrying water buckets back to the barn. At first, he thought it was only shadows moving through the trees. But when the moonlight shifted, he saw a woman standing in the distance. She wore old dark clothes and kept her face partially hidden beneath a scarf. She didn't move closer to the ranch. She simply stood there watching the dying stallion beside the broken fence. The stable boy froze when he recognized her. It was the widow from the edge of town. The same woman people avoided. The same woman nobody trusted. And somehow, the stallion was staring directly at her. The widow lived alone in a small wooden house at the far edge of town where the road disappeared into dry fields and dead trees. Most people avoided passing near her home, especially after dark. Children were warned not to speak to her, and neighbors shut their doors whenever she walked by. Nobody knew much about her except that her husband had died years earlier under tragic circumstances, leaving her with nothing but debts and silence. Over time, the town created stories about her. Some called her cursed. Others claimed she brought bad luck wherever she went. But the truth was simpler and far sadder. She had simply become invisible to the world. Every morning, She carried water from the old well herself. She repaired her own roof when storms damaged it. She sold handmade blankets in the market just to survive the winter. Yet even there, people barely looked at her. But ever since news spread about the ranch owner's death, something inside her had changed. Each evening, she secretly walked to the hill overlooking the ranch and watched from a distance. She saw the workers moving like ghosts across the property. She saw the black stallion standing beside the broken fence every night beneath the moonlight. And each time she saw him, tears filled her eyes. Because, unlike the others, she understood why the horse refused to eat. Years ago, before tragedy destroyed her life, she had visited the ranch many times. Back then, the owner was younger, kinder, and full of dreams. He had trusted very few people, but somehow he trusted her. They spent long afternoons riding across open fields while the black stallion ran beside them through the wind. Those memories had been buried for years. Until now. One stormy evening, the widow sat alone inside her house while rain struck the windows. A small lantern flickered beside her chair as she listened to distant thunder. Then suddenly, she heard voices outside. 2 men from town were passing nearby. "That horse won't survive another week," one of them said. "They should put the poor thing down," the other replied coldly. The widow's hands tightened around the edge of her chair. "Put him down." The words cut through her like a knife. She closed her eyes, remembering the stallion as a young horse racing freely beside the ranch owner years earlier. The animal had once been full of life, proud and untamed. Now he was starving himself to death. And nobody understood why. That night, the widow made a decision she had avoided for years. She wrapped herself in an old dark coat and quietly left her house before dawn. The cold wind pushed against her as she walked the long dirt road toward the ranch. By the time she arrived, workers were already gathered near the stable speaking in worried voices. The stallion had grown weaker overnight. One ranch hand claimed the horse might not survive until morning. Then someone noticed the widow standing near the gate. Silence spread instantly. "What's she doing here?" one worker muttered. Another man stepped forward angrily. "You need to leave." But the widow didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the stallion inside the stable. Even from a distance, she could see the pain in his tired eyes. The workers moved to block her path. Nobody wanted her near the horse. The ranch had already been filled with enough mystery and rumors since the owner's death. Her sudden appearance only made people more uneasy. "She's got nothing to do with this place anymore," one man snapped. The widow lowered her head and turned as if she might leave peacefully. But then something unbelievable happened. Inside the stable, the dying stallion suddenly lifted his head. For the first time in days, life returned to his eyes. The horse stared directly at the widow and let out a weak, trembling cry. The workers stepped back in shock as the weak cry echoed through the stable. For days, the stallion had barely moved or reacted to anyone. Now suddenly, his ears lifted and his tired eyes locked onto the widow standing near the gate. Nobody spoke. The widow slowly turned back toward the horse, her breathing unsteady. The cold morning wind moved through the ranch, carrying dust across the empty yard. Even the workers seemed frozen, unsure whether to stop her or let her pass. Then the stallion let out another soft cry. This time, it sounded almost desperate. The widow took one careful step forward. The workers watched nervously as she crossed the yard toward the stable. One ranch hand tried to warn her. "He hasn't let anyone near him," he said quietly. "Be careful." But she continued walking. The stallion's body trembled weakly as she approached. Up close, the horse looked even worse than before. His ribs showed clearly beneath his dark coat, and his legs struggled to support his weight. Yet despite his condition, his eyes never left her face. The widow stopped only inches away from him. For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, with shaking fingers, she raised her hand and gently touched the side of his neck. The reaction stunned everyone watching. The stallion closed his eyes immediately and released a deep breath, almost like relief after endless pain. His body relaxed beneath her touch, and his head lowered softly against her shoulder. One of the workers whispered, "Impossible!" The widow's own eyes filled with tears. She stroked the horse carefully, speaking to him in a soft voice nobody else could fully hear. The stable remained completely silent except for the quiet sound of the stallion breathing against her. Then something even stranger happened. For the first time in nearly a week, the stallion turned toward the untouched bucket of feed beside the wall. Slowly and weakly, he took a bite. The workers stared in disbelief. Another bite followed. One ranch hand nearly dropped the water bucket he was holding. Others exchanged nervous looks, unable to understand what they were seeing. Nothing had worked before, not medicine, not food, not comfort. Yet the moment the widow touched him, the dying horse finally began eating again. The widow rested her forehead gently against the stallion's neck as tears rolled down her face. She had missed him more than words could explain. Memories flooded back through her mind like a storm. Years earlier, the stallion had not belonged to the ranch owner yet. He had been wild, violent, and impossible to control. Many people wanted the animal sold or shot after he injured several trainers. But the widow, back when life was still kind to her, had seen something different in him. While others feared the horse, she spent weeks patiently calming him. She fed him by hand, sat beside him for hours, and slowly earned his trust. Eventually, the stallion allowed only 2 people near him, her and the ranch owner. The 3 of them had once been inseparable. But after tragedy tore their lives apart, she disappeared from the ranch forever. Until today. As the stallion continued eating slowly, one older worker stepped closer, his expression filled with confusion. "How does he know you?" he asked carefully. The widow looked down without answering. Before anyone could question her further, the stallion suddenly nudged something hidden beneath the hay near the corner of the stable. A small wooden box slid into view across the floor. It looked old, dusty, and forgotten. One worker bent down and picked it up carefully. "There's something inside," he murmured. The box creaked open. Inside rested an old photograph, a silver pocket watch, and a sealed letter with the dead ranch owner's name written across the front in faded ink. The widow's face instantly turned pale, because she recognized the handwriting immediately. The widow's hands trembled as she stared at the sealed letter inside the wooden box. For a moment, the entire stable felt frozen in silence. Even the workers seemed afraid to speak. The handwriting on the envelope belonged to the ranch owner. She would have recognized it anywhere. One of the ranch hands carefully handed her the letter, noticing how pale her face had become. The widow hesitated before taking it, almost as if touching the paper itself would reopen wounds buried years ago. The stallion stood quietly beside her now, calmer than anyone had seen him since the owner's death. He pressed his head gently against her shoulder as though he already knew what the letter contained. Slowly, the widow broke the faded seal. Inside was a folded note written many years earlier. The ink had slightly faded, but the words were still clear enough to read. As her eyes moved across the page, tears began rolling down her cheeks. The workers exchanged nervous looks. "What does it say?" someone finally asked. For several seconds, the widow couldn't answer. Her voice felt trapped beneath years of pain and regret. Then quietly, almost in a whisper, she began reading aloud. The letter spoke about love. Not ordinary love, but the kind that survives even after people are forced apart. The ranch owner wrote about the happiest years of his life, years spent riding across open fields beside the woman he truly loved. He admitted that his wealthy family never approved of her because she came from a poor background. They pressured him to end the relationship, threatening to cut him off from the ranch and inheritance if he refused. And eventually, he gave in. The widow closed her eyes as old memories returned like ghosts. She remembered the day he stopped coming to her house. The silence that followed. The heartbreak that slowly destroyed both of them. But the letter revealed something nobody else had known. He had never stopped loving her. The stallion had been their secret companion through those years. The horse had carried them across rivers, through forests, and across endless sunsets when life still felt hopeful. According to the letter, the stallion became restless and aggressive after they separated because he sensed their pain. "He remembers everything," the ranch owner had written. "More than people realize." One worker lowered his head uncomfortably after hearing the words. Suddenly, the horse's strange behavior no longer felt like madness. It felt like grief. But the letter contained one final secret that changed everything. Near the end of the page, the ranch owner confessed he had prepared new documents shortly before his death. Hidden somewhere inside the ranch house was proof that he intended to leave part of the ranch, and the stallion, to the widow after he died. Shock spread across the stable immediately. "What?" one worker blurted out. Another man frowned nervously. "His family will never allow that." And he was right. By sunset that same day, news of the letter had already spread through town. Before long, expensive black cars rolled onto the ranch carrying the ranch owner's relatives. They arrived dressed in dark suits with angry expressions and sharp voices. The owner's older brother stormed into the stable first. "This is ridiculous," he snapped after hearing about the letter. "That woman is lying." The widow stepped back silently while the stallion moved protectively beside her. The horse's calm behavior vanished the moment the relatives entered the stable. His ears pinned back, and he stomped heavily against the wooden floor. The workers noticed immediately. "He never acted like that before," one whispered. The owner's brother demanded the letter be handed over at once, but the widow refused. For the first time in years, fear slowly turned into strength inside her. Too much had already been stolen from her life. She would not allow them to bury the truth again. As tension filled the stable, the old ranch manager finally stepped forward. His weathered face looked troubled. "There may be another document," he admitted quietly. "The boss mentioned a second letter before he died." The entire room fell silent again. Because suddenly, the mystery surrounding the ranch owner's death no longer seemed accidental at all. Rain clouds covered the sky the next morning as the entire town gathered outside the ranch house. Word about the hidden letter had spread everywhere overnight. Some people came out of curiosity, others came hoping for answers about the ranch owner's mysterious death. But most were there to see the widow, the woman the town had ignored for years. She stood quietly near the porch with a black stallion beside her. Unlike before, the horse no longer looked weak or lifeless. Though still thin, strength had slowly returned to his eyes. He stayed close to the widow every second, as if protecting her from the crowd surrounding the ranch. The ranch owner's relatives stood on the opposite side of the yard, furious and impatient. His older brother especially looked nervous now. Sweat covered his forehead despite the cold weather. Then the old ranch manager stepped forward carrying a small metal box. "I found this hidden beneath the owner's office floorboards," he announced. The crowd immediately fell silent. Inside the box rested several papers, old photographs, and another sealed envelope. Unlike the first letter, this one looked newer. Written across the front were simple words. "To be opened if anything happens to me." The ranch manager carefully opened the envelope while everyone watched. His hands trembled as he unfolded the pages inside. Then he began reading aloud. The ranch owner explained that he feared someone close to him had been trying to force him into signing control of the ranch away. He admitted arguments with his own brother had become dangerous during the weeks before his death. Most shocking of all, he wrote that if he died unexpectedly, the widow should inherit ownership of the stallion and a large part of the ranch itself. Gasps spread through the crowd. The owner's brother immediately shouted in anger. "That letter means nothing." But before he could continue, the ranch manager revealed one final piece of evidence, a signed document carrying the ranch owner's official signature. The inheritance was legal. The widow covered her mouth in shock as tears filled her eyes again. After years of loneliness and humiliation, the man she once loved had finally tried to make things right. Even after all the lost years between them, he had never forgotten her. The crowd slowly turned toward the owner's brother. People began whispering angrily among themselves. Old rumors suddenly felt more believable now. The pressure, the arguments, the mysterious death, it all pointed toward something darker hidden inside the family. The brother realized the town was no longer on his side. Without another word, he stormed away toward the waiting cars while the rest of the relatives followed behind him in silence. And for the first time since the ranch owner's death, peace finally settled over the property. The widow looked down at the stallion standing beside her. Gently, she placed her hand against his neck once more. The horse closed his eyes calmly beneath her touch. "He waited for you," the stable boy whispered softly. The widow smiled through tears. "No," she replied quietly. "He was waiting for the truth." Days later, the town changed in ways nobody expected. People who once ignored the widow now greeted her kindly in the streets. Children visited the ranch again. Workers repaired the broken fences and cleaned the empty barns. Slowly, life returned to the property. But every evening before sunset, the widow walked with the stallion to the hill behind the ranch where the owner had been buried beneath a large oak tree. She would stand there silently while the wind moved through the grass around them. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, the stallion gently lowered himself beside the grave. The widow sat next to him, resting her hand against his neck while tears filled her eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from peace. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone anymore. The ranch owner was gone. But love, loyalty, and truth had survived long after death. And beneath the fading sunset, the black stallion finally stopped waiting.